Welcome to Safeguarding, Keeping Children and Adults Safe, a training workshop by CCA as part of CCA Jerwood Supports Programme. This session takes the form of a webinar and Q&A by Roisin Timlin from Volunteer Now. You can read Roisin's full bio on CCA's supports page. I will now take this opportunity to welcome Roisin Timlin to begin the session.
Good morning, everybody. The session that I'm going to cover this morning as part of the training webinar is Keeping Children and Adults Safe, an Introduction. The aim of the session this morning is to provide an introduction to safeguarding children and adults. I just really want to start the session by highlighting a few of the documents that will be very important to you if you wanted to look further into some of the safeguarding things to think about when you're facilitating or working with children and adults. So the Regional Safeguarding and Children's Policy Cooperating to Safeguarding Children and Young People, this came out in 2017. And all the procedures and overarching frameworks for organisations that are providing services to children, young people and families. So that will be everybody in the statutory, private, independent, community, voluntary and faith-based sectors. This would also apply to anyone that's paid staff or volunteers working with children and adults. The Adult Safeguarding, Prevention and Protection and Partnership document that aims to improve safeguarding arrangements for adults who are at risk of harm for abuse, exploitation or neglect. This policy outlines the operational procedures that are intended to be used by all organisations working with or providing services to adults across, once again, the statutory, voluntary, community, independent and faith sectors, and again it includes all staff and volunteers. Both these policies very strongly emphasise that safeguarding is everyone's business and therefore should be applied by individuals acting as responsible citizens at home and in our communities. Within the policies, the term safeguarding is used in the widest sense, and it really hones in at looking at promotion, prevention and protection in all the activities that we are doing with adults. Effective safeguarding will promote the welfare of the child and the adult, prevent harm from occurring through early identification of risk and appropriate and timely intervention, and protect them from what harm when it's required. These policies also hone in on having safeguarding actions and measures to help prevent risk of harm for children and adults. These latter two documents here, Keeping Children Safe, Our Duty to Care, and Keeping Adults Safe, A Shared Responsibility, Volunteer Now have developed these. They're standards and guidance for organisations working with children, young people and adults. These will be very beneficial for anyone who is maybe wanting to look at their safeguarding policy, maybe develop one. These two documents will help you do that. There'll be a number of resources in these documents and it'll help you write your safeguarding policy. It outlines the minimum standards which organisations should be adhering to when working with children and young people. So they're very beneficial. It's useful for staff and volunteers to consider who may be an adult at risk or an adult in risk and need of protection when you're working with groups. The definition is an adult at risk of harm is a person aged 18 or over whose exposure to harm through abuse, exploitation or neglect may be increased by their personal characteristics or life circumstances. There are a number of factors which may increase the risk of harm in adulthood. Some of these examples may include where an adult is socially isolated, where there's a pattern of violence might exist or has existed in the past, where drugs or alcohol are maybe being misused, financial problems, where the adult demands more than a carer can offer, and where a person has had a change to their lifestyle as a result of maybe becoming a carer. An adult in need of protection. Once an adult then is unable to protect their own well-being, properties, assets, rights, or interest, or where the action or inaction of another person or persons is causing or likely to cause him or her harm. So this is clear then where there would be immediate risk of harm for someone, and that's where then they'd be signposted on for some protection. That could be by referring them to police, the trust, or gateway. And this is where a referral will be made, and that person will be signposted to obtain some safeguarding support. We're now going to look at the legal and policy context. So there are a number of key pieces of legislation in Northern Ireland which are relevant in terms of safeguarding children, young people, adults, to help create safe environments for them. The first one there that I'm going to highlight is the Safeguarding Vulnerable Groups Order 2007, which was amended by the Protection of Freedom Act in 2012. This order aims to prevent unsuitable people from working or volunteering with children and or adults. It places a legal requirement on employers to ensure that they do not involve a barred person in regulated activity. To ensure that they are complying, employers should request an enhanced disclosure with barred list check before offering a volunteer role or a paid role in regulated activity with children and adults. This order establishes the Disclosure and Barring Service, which maintains the children's barred and the adults barred list. It is a criminal offence for anyone who is named on the children's barred list to work or volunteer with children in a regulated capacity. It is also a criminal offence for anyone named on a barred list to do this. An organisation, if they knowingly employ a staff member or offer a volunteer role to a person that they know is on a barred list, they're committing offence. The other one there is the United Nations to the Convention of the Right of the Child. And this order really highlights that children have rights as well. This is the main legislative basis for the provision of children's services in Northern Ireland. That links into the Children's Northern Ireland Order here. All our key safeguarding messages are based on this order. These principles have clear implications for all organisations working with children and young people. It puts the paramountcy on putting the welfare of the child first when we're making decisions about them. Partnership, it involves working with parents and other agencies to meet the child's needs. It also places a real emphasis on prevention. It's about the state's obligation to provide support services to keep children safely within families where possible. So there's a duty of care on all of us to pass on any concerns that we may have about a child. And it also places a statutory duty on the likes of social services and police to investigate where there's reasonable cause. The next one there is the Sexual Offences Northern Ireland Order, which came into play in 2008. This provides a clear framework to protect all individuals from sexual crime and sets the legal age for consent here in Northern Ireland as 16. It strengthens provision which protect children that are in relationships in a trust relationship with an adult. A relationship of trust arises when an adult is in a relationship of care through their work or activity, paid or unpaid, with the young person, which puts the adult in a position of power or influence over the child. It also creates new offences, which criminalise the abuse of children through prostitution and pornography. And the other one there is the criminal law. So the criminal law it's an obligation on citizens to provide any information they may have to the police if there's a suspected crime or a crime has happened. So that information we all should be duty bound to pass that information on. This moves me on then to looking at the categories of abuse. I'm going to outline here 7 categories of abuse. The first 5 here are going to be looking at the categories that are relevant to both children and adults and the latter two will be just categories that are relevant to adults. So in order to start considering what is meant by abuse, it's useful to let us explore and think about what are the categories of abuse, what would some of the signs and symptoms be. First one there is physical abuse. Physical abuse is one of the categories that we may notice much quicker than others, as there may be a visible marking on a child or an adult consistently. We may see or hear something physically abusive occurring. Some of the indicators or signs that you might see there would be a range of things that I've highlighted on the slide. So hitting, pushing, rough handling, biting, pinching, shaking, throwing, poisoning, force feeding, inappropriate use of restraint, and inappropriate use of medication or confinement. There's a whole range of others, but these are just a few things we've highlighted today on the slide. Emotional abuse, one of maybe the harder ones for us to pick up on quickly, because a lot of the times there's not a visible marking. It may be someone's behaviour that might make us think there's emotional abuse happening. Shouting, yelling, or swearing are some of the things that would be linked to emotional abuse. Humiliating, ridiculing, provoking fear of violence, making a child or an adult feel worthless or unloved, inadequate, or deliberately silencing, blaming, or controlling. Some levels of emotional abuse is involved in all types of maltreatment, which again makes it very difficult to spot the signs or separate it out from other forms of abuse. Sexual abuse. This occurs regardless of whether or not the child is aware of what is happening. It may involve contact or non-contact activities. It also can include stalking, grooming, indecent exposure, showing pornography, being involved in the production of sexually abusive material. The next one there is neglect. This is someone's basic needs not being met by their caregiver, whether it's a parent or a guardian for a child or a carer for an older person. So it's lack of food, lack of water, lack of heat, ventilation or light, failure to provide adequate supervision or shelter, and failing to provide access to appropriate health and social care. So it's those basic needs not being met. Neglect may include physical neglect as well, to the extent that health or well-being is impaired. Administering too much or too little medication can also fall into that. Withholding necessities for life, such as nutrition, heating, or clothing. Also, failure to intervene in situations that are dangerous to the person concerned, or when person lacks capacity. That could all fall into neglect as well. Exploitation, it's the deliberate maltreatment, manipulation, or abuse of power and control over another person to take advantage of another person's situation. Usually, but not always, the personal gain from using this as a commodity. Some of the things that would fall under exploitation would be slavery, servitude, forced labour, sexual exploitation, engagement in criminal activity, begging, benefit, or other financial fraud or trafficking. Although exploitation is not included in the categories of registration for the Child Protection Register, professionals have recognised that child sexual exploitation is big. It's happening here, and it's something we're trying to raise an awareness with all the time. These next two categories are relevant to adults. The first one there is financial abuse. This is actual or attempted theft, fraud, or burglary. It is the misappropriation or misuse of money, property, benefits, material, goods, or others, without somebody's consent. So some of the things could be exploitation, financial exploitation, embezzlement, controlling or withholding pension or benefits, putting pressure on someone around their wills, property, or inheritance, would all fall within that. Financial abuse, sadly, is one of the largest or highest categories of abuse that our older people here in Northern Ireland are victims of. And then the final one there is institutional abuse. This is the mistreatment or neglect of an adult by a regime or individuals in a setting which adults at risk reside in or use. So it could be a nursing home, a hospital, something like that, residential care. It can be seen at times attitudes and behaviours that amount to discrimination. Some other things would be poor practice and behaviours by staff and volunteers could lead to institutional abuse. Inflexible regimes, rigid routines, lack of leadership, training, supervision could all lead to institutional abuse in these cases. There's also a number of related definitions which interface with safeguarding children and adults, which staff and volunteers should be aware of. I just want to highlight them here in this slide. Domestic violence and abuse. This is threatening, controlling, and violent behaviour. Children can also experience domestic abuse and violence in lots of different ways. They might see the abuse, hear the abuse, see a parent's injuries or distress. Young people can also suffer from domestic abuse in relationships, but they may not realise that this is happening or what it is. Just wanted to highlight female genital mutilation, FGM. This involves procedures that include a procedure that here is considered sexual and physical abuse. It's a practice that's carried out across African and Middle East and Asian countries, but we're finding that it is happening here and it is a form of sexual and physical abuse. Child sexual exploitation. You might hear me through the webinar, shorten that to CSE. This is something we're trying to raise awareness about because it is happening here. It is a form of child sexual abuse. It occurs where an individual or a group take advantage of a young person, and they can be exploited in various ways. So it's something we're on our radar and we're trying to promote. Human trafficking is also happening here as well. Hate crime is on the rise, honour-based violence and forced marriage. So these are just some other related definitions that we want to raise awareness. You could come across this when you're facilitating a group, or it could come to your attention. And once again, you would pass this on through your reporting procedures. Bullying. Bullying is also something that we like to highlight. This is something you should be aware of, especially if you're facilitating groups or workshops, so that you would be wanting to make it very clear that there's a zero tolerance to bullying, and you'd outline that maybe in some of your contracts. So bullying may be emotional, physical, verbal, indirect, or cyber online bullying. It may stem from perceived differences for a range of things. As well as being an intentional act, bullying may also be an unconscious act. There may be a child or young person's really not aware that that's what they're doing. Staff and volunteers should be vigilant in organisations and identify if this is happening, and have guidelines in place on how to deal with that. So moving on then, we've covered the categories and things like that. So source, how could information come to you? So we've looked at the categories of abuse and all of that, but what do we do now? How do we follow up? If a source of concern was to come to you while you're facilitating, you see or hear something or something said to you, some of the things that you need to think about. So examples of concern could be a worrying remark made by a child or adult, physical and or behavioural indicators of abuse, or something another child or adult has told you about that person, which would suggest to you that maybe abuse has taken place. A disclosure is when a child or an adult or staff or member disclose to you that they are being abused, they're at risk of harm, they're not safe. And an allegation is where a staff member or a volunteer it is alleged to have caused harm to a child or adult. So a disclosure effectively has been made against a staff member or maybe a volunteer that you're working with. It is important that staff and volunteers know how to respond and report to each of these situations. It also helps staff and volunteers know where possible what certain indicators of abuse may look like. So just to recap, if an information comes to any of us, whether it's a disclosure or a concern or an allegation, we're all legally and morally bound to pass that information on. So as well as being familiar with the categories of abuse, it's also useful to maybe have an idea of an indicator. What happens if, what is an indicator? How might that come to us? What does that mean? So, you know, some of the indicators that we may be concerned about would be unexplained and repeated injuries of a child or an adult. Maybe there's someone coming along to a session on a regular basis and there's bruisings and marks on a continual basis with really not much of an explanation. Changes in appearance, withdrawn, being aggressive. Maybe someone who comes to your attention that they've got difficulty with finances when usually they wouldn't have been. Maybe a child coming along and saying they're hungry and thirsty all the time. Lack of concentration, focus, changes in sexual behavior and language, becoming aware that somebody's being isolated or confined, locked in a room, confined to a space at home or child or an adult, things like that, not wanting to be touched, poor hygiene, might be a concern that there's maybe neglect there, and maybe someone not having normal home comforts. So maybe there's no food, maybe there's no electric, heat, things like that. So maybe things like that you might be concerned about. So dealing with the concern. So we've looked at the categories, we've looked at how maybe a source or a concern or information might come to you. We've looked at some hypothetical indicators. So that leads on now to how to deal with concern. So where there are concerns about a child or an adult, a staff member or a volunteer should check these out with them, give them an opportunity to talk. Staff and volunteers must also follow their own reporting procedures. So be familiar with your reporting procedures. So if you're doing a facilitation, if you're facilitating for an organisation, be aware what their reporting procedures are. Ask to see those, familiarise yourself, especially with who is the designated person, who is the adult safeguarding champion, who do I need to speak to if I have a concern, who do I pass that information on to within that organisation that I am facilitating with. Have all those conversations before you actually start your session, so that if something does come to your attention, a disclosure or concern, that you can quickly know how to navigate that and how to pass that on. So check out your concerns if appropriate. There is a clear difference between checking out and investigating. Checking out is gathering information, using open-ended questions and inquiring about the well-being of the child or the adult. Record and date all observations of worry and marks and our behaviour. Okay, so if you're running, if you're facilitating for a long period of time, you're doing a weekly thing with the same people, same children, same adults, and you are worried about someone, do record that. That's all part of the information you'll be passing on to your designated person. Ideally, you would be finding out within your organisation or whomever what organisation you're working with at that period of time. Once again, the reporting procedures, but also the reporting form. Most organisations should have an incident form, a reporting form, something that you can jot all this down on as well. Seek advice. that's where you would touch base with your designated person. Those are the ones you'd run it past. You have a supportive role, not an investigative role. So it's clear that we are all very clear on that. We don't investigate. We have supportive role. And what that is if we are dealt with a disclosure or a concern, we listen, we record that, we pass it on to our designated officer, and the designated officer makes that formal referral on to social services or gateway. So investigation and judgment must be left to the statutory authority. So that's police and social services. So we can all be rest assured that we have done our bit by passing that information on to our designated person within the organisation we're working with, or if you're freelancing for an organisation, make sure you know what those processes are and who that person is that you touch base with within that organisation. That leads me on then to reasons why a child or an adult may not tell. So why someone may never say to you that something's happening. And some of the key things here are the fear of the abuser. They'll never tell because they're afraid. Fear of not being believed. And this is a biggie. It's very important that if we are faced with someone who has disclosed to us or we have concerns about a child or an adult's well-being, safety, or the risk of harm, we believe that information we have, we believe what we're being told. Fear of the consequences is another reason why someone might not tell. Communication difficulty. This could be someone with maybe a learning disability. They maybe don't have the language or the capacity to tell us what's happening. Language. We all live and work in a very diverse communities now. English mightn't always be someone's first language. They may not be able to tell us in words what's happening as well. Guilt, the guilt factor, bribes and games. So for very young children, it could be bribes and games. And also the abuse has been normalised. Sadly, in a lot of cases with young children, sexual abuse has been normalised. And they don't realise that it's wrong. And taboo subject. So for a lot of people, especially the older generation, this is a taboo subject. I could never talk about this. So it's hard for them to come forward with that. So just, I'm going to let that sit there for a minute. So these are some of the reasons, but the thing to take away from this for all of us as facilitators and working with children and young people and adults, if information comes to us, it's so important that we believe and pass on. So if you are faced with a disclosure and you have to deal with that, some of the things to maybe think about as that process is stay calm. It really does take a lot of courage for a child or an adult to make that disclosure, and the information's very sensitive. So listen to what they're saying, express concern and sympathy. Reassure that person that you will get them support if appropriate or if needed, that they've done the right thing in telling you. Ensure their immediate safety if that's required. Record in writing what has been said and report this to your designated person or your adult safeguarding champion at the earliest possible time as per the organisation's reporting procedures. So that's really important that you write that up and get that passed on. Record your report and act without delay. So this, in essence, is this report will be a piece of evidence. So it's about getting that written up, record it, pass it on to your designated person, and do that as quickly as you can. Some of the don'ts. Don't stop someone from disclosing. It's as I said earlier, it takes a lot of courage for someone to speak out. So if someone is disclosing, let them disclose. Don't promise to keep secrets. This is language we shouldn't be using. So if someone wants to tell us and maybe says, I don't want you to tell anybody this can't go any further. You need to let them know. We don't keep secrets. If you're giving me information that makes me believe you're at risk of harm, I'm duty bound to pass this on. If they decide not to continue disclosing, I would still be writing that down that somebody wanted to tell you something that they were concerned about, but once you wouldn't agree to keeping it a secret, they decided not to continue, I would still note that as something that's happened. Don't press the child or the adult for more details or make them repeat the story. Just let them tell you the key facts and listen and record that. Don't gossip about the disclosure or pass on information to anyone that does not need to know about it. So it's a need to know basis. Keeping that information confidential. So it would be the only other person that you or persons that you would be passing this information on to would be the designated person, the adult safeguarding champion. Do not contact the alleged person if that information is given to you who has caused harm. We do not investigate. It will be left up to the statutory authorities. If you are given the alleged person's name, you write that in your reporting form and that's all passed on. Don't attempt to investigate yourself. And don't leave details of your concern on our voicemail or an email. What I mean by that is, if you do have to contact the designated person or the adult safeguarding champion, make sure that if you have to phone them, you're phoning through to maybe their mobile that's going direct to them, or you're emailing them at that person's actual direct email. You wouldn't be leaving those details on, say, a reception voicemail where anybody could be picking that up the next morning, or you wouldn't be leaving those details on an info at or a reception email, because the right person's not picking up that information, and it's information that a general voicemail or email, that information shouldn't be sitting on. And don't delay. So get this information passed on to your designated officer as soon as possible. I always would say as soon as you've dealt with the situation, got the person to safety if required, I would be writing that report up and getting that information off to your designated person there and then, that day before you leave to finish your session. So just to tie it all up, this is how your report procedures would look. This is how they generally would look, and how it flows. And if you were looking at your safeguarding policy or a safeguarding policy for an organisation that you're going to be working with or volunteering with, this would be how I would see it. So staff and volunteers concerns. So I look at that as front of house. All of us who are facilitating, running workshops, volunteering, children and young people and adults, so doing activity-based stuff, we're like front of house. So a concern comes to us. So staff and volunteers' concerns come to us. We feed that to our line manager, designated officer, adult safeguarding champion within that organisation. And that person then seeks advice from the trust. So each area in Northern Ireland, so if it's Belfast, it's the Belfast Trust, there's the Western Trust, the Northern Trust, wherever you're working or volunteering, wherever that organisation's based, then it's whatever that trust area is. So if it's a children's concern, you would contact Children's Gateway. And it would be the designated officer, the line manager, the adult safeguarding champion would be doing that. If it's an adult's concern, you'd be contacting whatever trust area that you're working in. Okay. So your designated officer or line manager, adult safeguarding champion will touch base with the trust, pass on the concerns. Then the trustable then, or the gateway then, will make the decision. This is a referral. This is definitely a concern. This is an automatic referral. They take the referral and deal with it. And then if they feel it doesn't meet the threshold and they're not overly concerned, they may say to the designated officer, line manager, adult safeguarding champion, just please we'll keep a record of that. Please keep an ongoing monitoring. So that's really how it looks when it's all tied up. So the bottom line is, we have a concern about a child or an adult. We pass it on to our designated person, line manager, adult safeguarding champion. That's why it's important to know who that person is within your organisation, and they make the formal referral and touch base with the trust or gateway. and then it's passed on as either being investigated, or it's a case of we're not overly concerned at the moment. Please keep monitoring as and when. So that leads me on now to looking at creating a safe environment. So the things you need to be thinking about when you're facilitating planning activities, working with children and adults. So the key things here are, I'll start with effective management. So if you are involving, I think for the freelancers that are going to be listening to this webinar, if you are involving volunteers to help out on sessions, the things you want to be thinking about are support and supervision for your volunteers or your staff, and on a really good induction. And at that stage, that's where you'd be making them aware of code of behaviour, safeguarding policy, and any training they might need. Your recruitment and selection. So that's your organisation's, I suppose, safe recruitment processes. How does that look? Is there a police check done for those who are in regulated activity? And all of that. How are you recruiting your staff and volunteers? Is it going out open recruitment, use application CVs? Are you asking for references and all of that? General safety and management. So what you're looking at there is, are you risk assessing before you do an activity? How are you generally managing that? How are you safely running that? Sharing information and confidentiality. So if you are holding information when you're running activities, are you getting registration forms? Are you getting consent forms? Emergency contact, medical history, allergies, anything you need to know about the group you're working with. Where are you storing that information? How long are you storing it for? Code of behaviour, and this is very important. That staff and volunteers are given a code of behaviour to adhere to when they're representing your organisation or working with your organisation. And I'll look at this a bit further in the webinar. The positive behaviours to be avoided, and unacceptable behaviours whenever you're facilitating, representing, working for an organisation and things like that. So those are all the things that need to be looked at. So just then again, to just tie up sharing information and confidentiality, it's very important that personal information and records are securely stored, whether that be electronically with password protected access to certain folders, or in a lockable drawer. Sensitive details should not be subject to gossip. Information should only be given on a need-to-know basis. Where there are concerns about safety and welfare, remembering staff and volunteers must pass information on as per reporting procedures, and where cases do not need to be discussed with colleagues, care should be taken to ensure these details cannot be overheard by others. So if you do have to have a confidential conversation about a concern or something, do it in a private room, or if you're on the phone, make sure you're not doing it in an open plan office where others may hear. Risk assessment. So it's very important to risk assess activities, risk assess the venue that you're using, the facilities. It helps to identify and minimize potential issues. When you are assessing specific circumstances relating to a child or an adult, communication with the parents and carers and the child adult is essential, because we don't want blanket exclusions for activities. So like we just wouldn't be saying things like, okay, if a child has a disability, they can't be involved in our session. You're looking at how you can safely include everyone in your activities. So some of the key things to be thinking about when you're risk assessing an activity, an outing, a new project where you're bringing people together, you want to be thinking at assessing the risk. So In the process of examining what could possibly cause harm to a child or adult using services, participating in activities, staff and volunteers, you want to be looking at what are the risks, identifying them, what could the risks be, where are we going, what is the activity, what will be happening, all of that. An organisation needs to determine the level of risk. Could a risk be high? Could it be medium? Could it be low? Associated with identifying the risks. The purpose of determining the level of risk is to establish which risks warrant the most attention and which should be prioritised. Evaluate. Once you've identified if there are some risks with running an activity, you evaluate and see what is the likelihood of that happening or the impact of that. Can we manage the risk? Can we control it? So you'll be looking at what measures can we put in place to control and all of that. Can we transfer the risk to something else, or how are we going to look at that? So identify, evaluate, control, and then review. So once you've actually decided, okay, the risks are low, we believe that we can safely manage this activity for everyone involved, and we go along and we have the event or we have the activity. After it's over, we review it, and the things we're looking at is, okay, how did that go? Were there any issues? Was there any risks or anything happened we didn't think of? Or everything was fine, that worked, we'll know that for again. So it's about identifying, evaluating, controlling and reviewing. Now, if you were going to do an activity or involve some various groups of children and young people or adults with various maybe needs, and you think the risks are too high, then that's fine. Maybe you decide, well, that can't happen, the risks are too high, we can't control and manage those, we need to look at something else. So it's just remembering your risk assessing as you're going along. So that then moves me on to looking at programme planning. So it's really, really important that good planning and preparation is essential when ensuring that needs are met and activities and events are running smoothly. Some of the main things that you want to be thinking about to be considered to safely involve children and adults in activities may include some of these areas. So programme content. Have a clear programme. What is the event? What is the activity? And have that detailed and outlined as well. And what if the activity is it a day trip? Is it a residential? Is it a workshop? What is your activity? Consent. Consent should typically be from the adult themselves, where the adult has capacity to consent. If it's a child, it's always from the parent or guardian. Okay. Venue and environment. Are you using a new, where is your venue? What's the environment? Have you been to the venue before? If not, do a site visit. Is it ticking all the boxes? Is there any risk assessment you need to think about? Staff and volunteers must ensure all activities are made directly and indirectly accessible to everybody who wants to take part. Staff and volunteers, when you go to the venue, pre-venue, make sure the venue is accessible for all your participants. That's why it's so important to know your participants' needs. This may include access for wheelchairs, things like that. Once again, revisit your risk assessment. Is there any equipment or resources that you need or you're going to be using? Depending on what you're facilitating, if it's music, maybe even an art workshop, what resources and equipment you need. Are they there? All of that. Are they safe? Staff and volunteers. You want to be thinking about your ratio. So is there enough staff or volunteers available on the day to help supervise and manage your children, your young people, your adults? You want to be thinking about your staff and volunteers. You also want to be thinking of if you are involving staff and volunteers on the day, have they got adequate training? Are they aware of their code of behaviour? If they need police checked, has that all happened pre the event or activity happening? Parents and carers, once again, your consent. Do you want parents and carers to come along with maybe a child or a young person that has extra support needs if required? Consent for photographs if you're taking them, consent for if there's consent for any footage of filming or video, and all of that all needs to be thought of in advance. Children and young people, codes of behaviour, how they're expected to behave on the day, for adults as well. Any allergies? Do you need to know about any allergies on the day out or your activity? It's really important when maybe you're registering your children or young people and adults for one of your workshops or trips or whatever you're doing. How on the consent form also have any medical history you need to know about, because there will be nothing worse if you're running a session and maybe a child has a nut allergy and maybe somebody on the day is eating something that has nuts in it and you're not aware of that. Do they need an EpiPen? Who's administering that? All of those things you want to be thinking about. And policies and procedures. So your health and safety policy procedures, your safeguarding policy, what to do in an emergency, what happens if a child or an adult go missing, what is the plan for that? All of those things you want to be thinking of, code of behaviour, all of that. Those are all the things you want to be thinking of. Accidents, near misses. If you are going off for the day and taking children, young people or adults away to an event or an activity, have you emergency contact numbers for anybody if needed? How are you doing your head count, making sure everybody's accounted for before you leave? All those things to be aware of. So in your program planning, some of the key things you want to be thinking about for that activity, just to make sure that things run smoothly and you've all your policies and procedures in place for that day. So that's leading me on then to looking at a code of behaviour, why that's important, what that might look like. Developing a code of behaviour will help to create a child and person-centred environment. It provides clear guidelines to staff and volunteers on positive behaviours while working with vulnerable groups, as well as outlining what's on unacceptable behaviour for those and what to be avoided. It should provide clear expectations and boundaries for interactions with children and adults. So by outlining these codes of behaviours, it can really help reduce risk of harm to children and adults, and everyone's aware of what the responsibility is. Each organisation's code of behaviour will look different. It should reflect the nature and activity of the organisation. So in a way, your code of behaviour should be tweaked and it should mirror the ethos of your organisation. It should highlight how staff and volunteers are encouraged to use their skills, experience and knowledge of the children and adults and the understanding of the ethos of the organisation. Involving staff and volunteers in drafting up and reviewing the code of behaviour is useful for ensuring ownership of it, letting them take ownership of their behaviours when they're working, volunteering or freelancing for an organisation. It should also outline clear sanctions if it's breached, which should be linked to the disciplinary and problem-solving procedures, as well as setting boundaries and encouraging staff and volunteers to be good role models. It can help children, young people and adults to set out their own boundaries around what is appropriate behaviour and what is not. So some examples of a positive behaviour and those to be avoided may be, we should all be treating children and adults with dignity and respect. Be patient and listen. Value everyone as an individual and adopt a person-centred approach. Treat everyone fairly. Promote independence and choice and encourage everyone to participate fully in their ability, potential, and have fun. So if you're running projects, facilitating workshops, are running activities. Key thing is we want our staff and volunteers, we want to have a positive behaviours with them and encourage everyone to have fun, participate, and reach their full potential. Some of the avoids should be avoid taking a child or an adult alone on a car journey unless part of your core activities, and avoid doing things of a personal nature that a child or an adult can do for themselves. Positive behaviours, just to recap on the positive behaviours, positive behaviours are there to reflect consistency. They also promote a welcoming, supportive environment as well. Some of the things to think about, staff and volunteers, some of the things that should never be engaged in I've outlined a few here. So with children and adults, there should never be any level of abuse, neglect, or harm. Engage in rough physical games. Engage in sexually provocative games. Make inappropriate comments or jokes with the children and young people and adults that we're working with. Do not form inappropriate relationships. Don't make or accept loans of gifts or money. Don't gossip about personal and sensitive information, and don't use inappropriate language. And also remember, never take any photographs, video images, including with your mobile phone, without consent. It's very important that consent is got from the adult, if the adult can't consent, from their carer or advocate or guardian, and if it's a child or a young person, it should be from the adult, the parent or guardian. So just wanted to recap on that. Okay, so I just thought I'd like to also highlight a few things to think about if you are communicating online, working by facilitating maybe workshops online. Some of the things that you might want to think about, just some of the do's and the do nots, just in around code of behaviour and online communication. So staff and volunteers should never contact children or adult without prior consent from your organisation or parents or carers, and use an organisation's accounts and devices. So if you are running an online session or facilitating online for an organisation, you should use the organisation's work account, whether it's Zoom or Teams, whatever that is. Some things to consider if in the video call is consider communicating in groups. So rather it be one-on-one with a child or one-on-one with a young person or adult, can you do that in a group setting online? If it is a group of children or young people, use the parents or the carer's email address or telephone number to send the invite out to, so you're keeping them fully informed, and set clear boundaries for the call and share these in advance of communication. Remind participants of their boundaries at the beginning of the session. So you want to be reminding people of their behaviour when they're online, being respectful, being appropriate, and clearly setting those boundaries at the start. Staff and volunteers should use a meeting ID password in the waiting room function. That's a really good way to control who's coming into your session before you let them in. So you'd be looking to see there's a waiting room function. You're seeing all your people come in. You're maybe checking that against your registration form to make sure those are the people that are meant to come today, and then let them all in. Consider your visual. Are video cameras switched on or off? Are you going to use a virtual background to allow privacy? Consider your screen settings. Who can share? Who has permissions to share on your screen? What can they share? You want to maybe have it that as the host or the facilitator that only you can share the screen, because you've more control then, that people aren't sharing something a bit inappropriate that you have no control over. Think about your sound settings. You can mute participants if you need to. Remind them of their boundaries as well. and when people are speaking, to respect that, and consider the chat setting. Who has access to the information shared via chat? If needs be, set the chat function to be viewed only by the host. So, you know, if you want to have complete control over the chat, that only you can respond to things, so that people maybe aren't taking the chat offside and you're maybe not privy to what's being said. Familiarize themselves with the function of removing participants and reports as per procedures. So if you did have to remove someone from the session, you can do that, and then you can follow that up. So staff and volunteers should never, some of the nevers, should never send or receive private calls or text messages while supervising. And what I mean by that is, if you are there to facilitate a session or there to supervise children and young people at an activity, you shouldn't be on your phone constantly. You need to be aware of what's going on and be managing the situation. Never give out their personal phone numbers. So you should never give out any young person, child or adults participant phone numbers to anybody. Never befriend children or adults that you're working with on social network sites. So you wouldn't be accepting friend requests from children or young people, or the adolescents that are maybe in your workshop or your group. Never take photographs or videos without prior consent. Ensure all videos and photographs are appropriate, suitable dress, all of that, and avoid naming children, young people or adults in photographs and that. So rather than individually name people, you might just say, here's a group of children or young people that we had a workshop with, rather than identifying people. Physical contact. So some of the things to be mindful of in relation to physical contact. So when you're thinking about your code of behaviour, physical contact should be in the response to the need of the child and the adult, and not the worker. It should be with child's permission. Resistance should be respected. Avoid swimsuit areas. Be open and not secretive, and be governed by the age, stage and development of a child. So there could be a degree of physical contact in all our roles, depending on what it is, and it can be necessary in order to be responsive to the need of a child or an adult. So these would be the clear guidance that I would be, I suppose, promoting to you when you're thinking about physical contact, just boundaries and things like that. Okay, so that has come to the end of the webinar now. I'm free now, and I'd like to take any questions you might have. That would be great. I'm very, very keen to answer any questions or concerns you might have. So I'm opening the floor now to the Q&A.
I'll just jump in first. Roisin, thank you so much.
No problem.
The information you provided is so relevant and so useful to a lot of artists working. And I was thinking, what you're covering is like this is mostly for artists who maybe did freelance work, maybe taking their art skills into schools and working with school groups, or even working in a school.
Yeah.
This will also cover if they do get a job in an organization and
Yeah.
they find themselves in the role where they are the safeguarding person and they are bringing volunteers in. So I think there was a lot covered in that. So I think you've made that really relevant to the creative sector. And I always learn so much from your sessions, from what I need to be doing within my role at CCA as public programs curator as well, and how to be better. You know, how can I be better? How can I be a better facilitator? How can I look after my volunteers better?
Yeah.
What do I need to be doing within my role to make sure that I'm safe, my volunteers are safe, my artist educators are safe, and that the people that we're working with are in safe hands, whether that be our primary school children, whether it's children coming in with their families to take part in group activities, or whether we're going into the community and we're working with vulnerable adults, possibly older people. So I'd really like to see if anybody in our group had any questions on what was covered today.
Thank you, Laura. I just wanted to reiterate, Laura, what you said. Yes, there was a lot of information there this morning, and it might for some think, God, that was so quick and there was a lot going on. I suppose just to reiterate, this was a general raising awareness webinar. Volunteer now, you can tap into a range of safeguarding training that will go into this in a bit more depth and make it a wee bit more interactive with case studies and things like that. But the key message, Laura, for me, for everybody on the call here today is, you know, it is, yes, I spoke a lot about keeping children and adults safe, but also it's about keeping yourself safe as a facilitator. And I know you picked up on that and said that, Laura. There's a lot of food for thought there. And yes, you are all wearing many hats, and you might be freelancing facilitators, you might be working for an organization, you might be a volunteer, but the message is the same. If we are concerned about someone, information comes to us, pass that on within your reporting procedures for whomever you're working for at that time. And you know, just be eyes and ears, and just be mindful of you know, your code of behavior as well. But, you know, those were just the nuts and bolts that I covered there this morning, just to give you a flavour of the key things to be thinking of. So do risk assess before you do something, you know, and know the reporting procedures, know who to contact. And if you have any concern at all, or you're something doesn't sit well with you, touch base with the designated person. Or if you are freelancing and you are kind of doing your own thing, lift the phone. The public members, any of us can lift the phone to Gateway and say, I'm concerned, I'm not sure what to do. They will lead you and give you guidance on that. So never feel stuck and there's nowhere to go for advice and guidance. You can phone through to Volunteer Now to us. We have an inquiry line. We can help and advise as well.
That's so good. And if they wanted to do further training, and is there any way that anybody who's watching this, if like, what would they do if they wanted to do further training, or what if they wanted to try and get certificates, or like what are their options?
So all our training is certificated, and on our website, which you can see in this last slide here, Volunteer Now, if you go onto our website, there's a tab that says Safeguarding Training, and there's a training schedule, and there's an array of training. So it's a mix of face-to-face or Zoom like we've done today, only it'll be a bit more interactive. You can book on individually. There will be a cost. And at the end of the training, you will get your certificate to say that you've covered that module and that your certificate. So the advice we're given is if you need to do safeguarding training once every 3 years to keep yourself up and current. So it's once every 3 years. So you can dip into a wide range of training there on our website. So there's so much, and it's refreshed, and new sessions are uploaded all the time. So Laura, you can direct them to me as well. If Laura wants to pass on my email, I can help you maybe work out what session would be suitable.
And if they are working for an organization, is that how they would go through CCA, or like how do they do
Yes. So individual freelancers, self-employed, can't get an enhanced disclosure check. But if you are, for example, contracted in through an organization and you're in regulated activity, so if you're unsupervised, teaching, training, instructing for, running workshops on your own for that organization, the organization, as part of their safe recruitment, they will put you through your CCA check through that organization. So for just off the top of my head, Laura, if there was freelancers are working for your organization for 6 months and they were going to be doing workshops unsupervised for children and young people on a regular basis, then you would put them through under your organization's name. So that's how you'll get your CCA certificate when you're contracted to work in regulated activity within those organizations. Freelancers are self-employed. they can all get basics, and you can do that yourself through OCNNI's website. You go on and register, fill out the online application, you upload your ID and make the payment. I think it's £18 for a basic check. But if you're freelancing for yourself, you're not for an organisation, the highest level of check you can obtain is a basic check. But if you're contracted through an organisation and they're going to be placing you in regulated activity, the onus is on the organisation to get you your police check, process that through them.
Yeah. I think that's really good. And I think like when I was watching the session, the questions that were coming to my mind were, and like that are specific to the sector that I'm working in, or and I think you've covered these. So what I was going to ask was, you know, if I'm going into work for an organization and I've been asked to do something working out in the community, but with a group of older people, what would I need to do? And I think you covered that really nicely, where you've listed that, and so people can go back and look at that slide for reference. When they're, what do they need to do? How do they set up the space? What do they need to think of in advance? And the list of guidelines there were really good. And I'd also noticed that in the last, since I've done my training with you, the online, there's a lot more going on now with the online and how to keep people safe with that, because it was a fairly new area years ago, but now some things are happening online, webinars and workshops and across the Zoom platform.
And that's a good point, Laura, because it was in good old when COVID hit, we were getting inundated, as in volunteer now, our safeguarding team were being inundated with, we have to move everything online, we're worried about safeguarding, what do we need to be thinking about? And I suppose the key message is, the message hasn't changed if you see or hear, but we were thinking the difference is you're getting a bird's eye view into somebody's house now. If you were facilitating online and you saw in the background something awful happening, or how do you manage that? You'd be passing that on, but you might want to cut the session if that's happening, or you just don't know. But the good thing is about online is remembering your boundaries, especially if you're the host. You have control of the session, so you want to familiarize yourself with the settings. So I suppose in the session here this morning, Laura, only you and I have permissions to share screen, so nobody's going to go rogue and maybe put something inappropriate up. So there's other things to think about online, is you want to have complete control of the room or the visual. So you set your chat functions that you can see all the chat and that you reply, because you don't want maybe somebody off in the chat being abusive and you're not aware of it. So that slide on what to think about, if you're going to be running a session online using Teams or Zoom, is very useful before you set up so that you have control over everything that's going on. But I suppose, as I've just said, you're getting a bird's eye view into somebody's house. If you were to see something abusive in the background, you would be still passing that on.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think a lot of this, what I really enjoy through the safeguarding training, is it gives me the language that I need to apply to my planning and to my. And I remember before I'd done any safeguarding training, I didn't have that language. I didn't have that. I didn't know it was like, I would just use my own instinct on things.
Yeah.
So not everybody's using instinct on, or it could. It's not, there needs to be procedures in place. It needs to be thought about in advance where possible. I really appreciate all the information that you shared with us today, and I hope that our attendees have enjoyed it. And for others, this will be available on our supports page, where you can access this to help you with your planning work in the future.